I missed the date on this by a few weeks, but it just recently occurred to me that Kendrick Lamar's Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers just reached its 1 year anniversary. I wanted to know where y'all stand on it 1 year later, 1 year removed from an album that we had been waiting on for 5 years. Till this day, I still get harassment over me not being fully in love with this album, but I want to know if those same people that are still in my DMs constantly berating me for how I felt about it at the time are listening to it at this very moment. Certainly one of Kendrick Lamar's most polarizing records, and I don't think it's any coincidence that the album where he professes self-love and just exposure of his being over the course of his entire career and over the course of his entire life is the album where people are so split. It's a record where I'm revealing the ugliest sides of myself, the parts of me that you are likely to disagree with. I'm probably going to have fans going in one direction and real people going in another. For Kendrick Lamar, I think it was an incredibly ambitious record. I think if there was a mainstream artist who didn't make a record like this Kendrick Lamar one, we would have been anticipating one at some point. Definitely not written to the degree that Kendrick Lamar could write it to, it coming from anyone else. But given the times that we are in right now, do I think the record is ambitious in its entirety? No, but I do still strongly believe that right now, and even back when this album dropped, there wasn't a mainstream artist that was capable of writing this the way Kendrick Lamar wrote it. This is an album that connects Kendrick Lamar to his past and all of his previous works. It's such a gigantic highlight on the person that I used to be without the public's need for validation, so I also don't have to be ashamed of the person that I was as well. This is a part of my growth. This is a part of my process. This is a part of how I've become who I am right now. I can't be who I am without being who I was. I'm that same person, this time with the tools to understand what I needed back then. It's incredible self-reflection. I hear people are even getting more enjoyment out of it seeing it live, which is why this video is sponsored by SeatGeek. Now, SeatGeek's the #1 rated ticketing app. Summer's right around the corner, which means there's no better time to be confidently and terribly singing along to the music you've been privately worshiping for months than right now. I want to get stepped on by the big stepper live in person in front of everyone. How do I make that dream a reality? I just do a little name search on SeatGeek, really simple. Oh, Kendrick Lamar is still on tour. What do you know? That Vegas show is looking really nice. Make sure I get 2 tickets because there's absolutely no way I can be the only person to witness this. Did I mention there's a buyer guarantee on the tickets? And SeatGeek's the only site that allows you to return your tickets ahead of an event. It's literally a win-win situation, but maybe you're not like me. You don't want to see Kendrick. There's Beyonce who's on tour. There's Drake who's on tour. You want 21 to do something in front of Drake, you get to see it live in person. What are you waiting for? Still thought it couldn't get any better? Congratulations, you're wrong. You get to use my code Shawn for $20 off at SeatGeek. That's $20 off your first purchase with promo code Shawn. Make sure you click the link in the description to download the app. After 1 year of listening to Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, I will say that it has helped me recontextualize everything in Kendrick's discography and all the reasons why I've enjoyed some of his strongest moments. Mr. Morale is a big pivot for me sonically, but also obviously thematically, and has made me disassociate some of my favorite Kendrick Lamar songs from being what they are because of his own self-realizations about masculinity, about fatherhood, about addiction. It's had me questioning why I enjoyed some of the earlier works from Kendrick Lamar that I did, some of them including him willingly falling into the pitfalls of sex as a form of therapy just to get through your problems, your addictions to alcohol, your addictions to money. Those are coping mechanisms that this album, Mr. Morale, makes a very strong point to reject. And that isn't to say I can't still listen to and enjoy those earlier records from Kendrick, but it does put this album up further on the totem pole if subconsciously there were some enjoyment of those records because of trauma that was unaddressed even from myself. We're on to Pimp a Butterfly. It seems pretty obvious and easy for Kendrick to identify the enemy. He seems crushed underneath the weight of trying to identify who's attacking him on Damn, for instance. When listening to that album over again, it seems like he knows he's hurting, he knows he's in pain, but he just doesn't know where it's coming from. So the flow of the album ends up being a little awkward, though it is still one of my favorites from him. It really feels like he's trying his best to self-diagnose, whereas on Mr. Morale, he's done a great job at grabbing help from all that he possibly can, utilizing all of his resources to identify what the problem is, which is why even though the musical backdrop for many of the songs is not something that I am very keen on, he's very confident in his approach to the album. It's no surprise to me that the consensus around Mr. Morale is as split as it is, given that it contains some of Kendrick's strongest writing. And strong writing doesn't have to be something that I necessarily agree with. It just has to be nuanced, which is also a consequence for me when listening to this album, because it's so nuanced that it's unlistenable at times for me. Not because the content is just too traumatic for me to dive into. Sometimes it just ruins the song, which is why I still strongly believe that a lot of the content on this album shouldn't be songs. They're great writing pieces. As a book, I think Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers will be a banger in the library, like silent reading, you know what I'm saying? But I know many of you are going to disagree, and that's fine. I'm just speaking from where I'm coming from when it comes to my experience with this album. I feel like nuance is great in short doses, but the problems that Kendrick approaches with a lot of this album are not small. But I commend him because some of the details that he's still able to pull out of some of these subjects are incredible. The social commentary that he gives on The Heart Part 5, the cultural criticism that he gives on Savior, the intimacy that he breaks down on We Cry Together. It has to be acknowledged that Kendrick is the only artist in his generation that will be able to write something like this as well as he has at the level that he's at. There isn't another person around his size that I feel like could tackle subject matter like this at all. Another beautiful part about this album is what it did for the expectation of Kendrick Lamar. I think he very, very healthily separated himself from trying to top previous works. And I don't mean that he's no longer trying to be the best that he can be, but just in a different way. There's no need to redo To Pimp a Butterfly. There's no reason to try to top Good Kid, Mad City. It's pointless to try to recreate the energy that he had on Damn. Kendrick, to me, is one of the few artists who have mastered the art of growth. And the core of Kendrick Lamar has not changed. He is still a conscious individual. He is still an introspective MC. I feel like the overall reception to the album a year removed from its release date perfectly illustrates the point that you aren't gonna get it all right. You aren't gonna win them all. And you're not supposed to. But being content with that, I mean, that was the whole point of this album. I'm not your savior. I'm not that guy. I'm not him. I don't want to be him. I'm happy with who I am, and I'm not going to be ashamed of who I was just to make you more comfortable with my quote-unquote growth. There is no greater part of this album for me, a year removed from it, still than the connection that a track like You has to Mother I Sober, which is why I strongly believe Mother I Sober is the greatest track that Kendrick Lamar has ever written. Not the greatest song he's ever made, but the greatest track he's ever written. And how You so strongly marries itself to the themes within this entire album. He is just so comfortable holding that bottle. He's so confident. Every emotion that you can think of is coming out of Kendrick Lamar while he is marrying himself to that bottle of liquor. He's coming off like a madman, ranting and venting and grieving, but he only seemed able to do that while he was drunk, with his addiction, with his crutch, with his coping mechanism. When we go to Mother I Sober, scratch that. Before you even get to Mother I Sober, all the tracks that you listen to up until then, he's got lines on this album talking about peekaboo can't hide behind your money, dog. How he uses sex to overlook his problems in relationships, reaffirm his masculinity, reject femininity, all the vices that he is dependent on that keep him distracted from his actual root issues. But then when we get to Mother I Sober, on a track where he has no vices, no distractions, no nothing to help him get through his issues, he is almost mute. The way he is talking on this song is like a frightened child, someone who fully understands the weight of everything that he's been dealing with subconsciously over the years and has to face sober, without the crutches, without the help, without the aid of any of your vices. That one track that Kendrick made almost 10 years ago, illustrating how much he's grown up until this very moment, is, oh, it's beautiful. That's beautiful. That's art. But after a year of listening to this album, that's about where my appreciation for it ends. Obviously, there's far more context into the meanings of this album and how I felt about it that I detailed in my final review for it last year, if you want to go watch that. But it is still very much an intimate listen that I feel requires a lot of patience and understanding to get through. It isn't something that me, being someone who's experienced, I would say, a large majority of what Kendrick Lamar is talking about on that album, has a fun time listening to over and over again. Aside from that, I don't really feel like the conversation around this album has moved the needle on the topics that it has talked about as much as the fans would have wanted it to. And that isn't discounting any of the awareness that this album might have brought to you, if it's helped you rethink some of your own life choices or decisions in a different way. And again, it isn't Kendrick's job to fix issues that are that huge, but this is where that savior complex ultimately ends up coming from, tackling issues that are just so gigantic. You kind of automatically come off as an authoritative figure when you have the audience that Kendrick Lamar has. Hell, any person with a fan base is going to come off like an authority figure when speaking about subjects like this, whether they're right or wrong. So while I understand the criticisms that he levies against the public on a track like Savior, when he tackles issues that are so broad, it also makes me sympathize a little bit with his audience, because what else are they supposed to look at you as? Maybe not a savior, but your voice is large, about as large as the issues that you're talking about. Obviously, people are going to look at you like you've got the answers. It's a consequence of tackling real life issues musically. And that's another point of contention for me on this album still a year later, is some of these topics just don't work as songs for me. But we've already been over that. Kendrick Lamar's writing and rapping is near flawless, but I can definitely consume most of this in other mediums and be completely fine with it. It just feels so awkward listening to it as a song. For me, it just does not work, a lot of it. And I think that's where we end up getting lost, because I don't think Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers is forgettable at all. But as an album, it's not going to retain the listener's attention. And I think that's reflected in the sales. And I'm not using sales as an argument for quality. It's just a good indication of what people are actually listening to. There's a reason why the Lil Durks and the ESTGs of the world's pain don't translate the same way Kendrick's does. Not because Kendrick's more articulate, or because Kendrick's pain means more, or that his music is that much more substantive. It's because they've fully given into the business of monetizing that pain, making it sound catchy, making it sound appealing, making it sound good. Kendrick didn't do that. He abandoned that, which is why, as much as I'm giving him props, musically, a lot of Mr. Morale doesn't work. But on paper, oh my God. Lil Durk's most recent album has a bunch of hard-hitting beats filled with him talking about the amount of people that he's lost, the pain and the struggles that he's gone through when it comes to him dealing with grief. Of course, all that pain gets lost in the sauce. I'll never forget La Malordina, a track that features El Camino and Benny the Butcher on a clipping track. And the point of this track was that if the musical representation of the content that is within this song matched what you were listening to, it wouldn't be catchy. It wouldn't be an earworm. It wouldn't be appealing. You wouldn't want to listen to it because it's actually terrible content. It's terrible what this person is talking about. It's terrible what this person is going through. And they felt as though that track should illustrate that point. It's terrible what this person is making these people go through. There's a trail that this person leaves behind that doesn't get discussed in the music that they talk about. So obviously the themes and the traumas and the impact are going to be lost. And again, that's something that I can highlight about Mr. Morale. It abandons trying to feed into the business of music as best it can. Outside of Kodak's presence on the album kind of muddying the waters in context of some of the other themes of the record, something that I've also discussed in my final review for the album, that's generally where my point of contention with Mr. Morale ends. A year later, I feel relatively similar to it as I did when I first heard it. But feel free to tell me how you felt about Kendrick Lamar, Mr. Morale, and the Big Steppers a year removed from the record. Do you love it more? Do you listen to it less? Are you a bigger Kendrick Lamar fan now than you've ever been? Let me know in the comments down below. I'll see you soon.